1960, and in 1962, at that time, very young men showed up, Ismail Merchant and James Ivory, and they said, would you, they wanted to make a film, and they wanted me to write the screenplay of The Householder. And I said, I've never written a film. They said, it's okay, we never made one either. So that's how we started. I'd hardly seen a film because I was living in India, and all we got was sort of the scrapings of the worst Hollywood films, and I just didn't see any. I love dialogue scenes. Maybe I should be writing plays, I don't know, I haven't written any, but I certainly love dialogue scenes. And sometimes they haven't been worked up to the pitch that I feel that it could reach, and maybe I can do it, and I'll try and do it, work it up more so it'll be more resonant, so it'll be stronger. But it's usually always within the dialogue for me.
this session of the Ruth Pravar's Jhabwala Film Festival. This is part of the tribute the Jhabwala family has made an effort to in her honor.
My mother was basically, the way she thought of herself was as a writer. She never really thought of herself as a screenplay or a script writer. She always thought of herself as an author. And as an author, unfortunately, there's no way to celebrate her. The only way to celebrate her as an author is to read her books. But nevertheless, we are having this event, and in this event, we sort of turn from being a scriptwriter to an author. Always believed that one is sort of born into something. So you're born an artist or you're born a lawyer, I suppose. But she herself was born a writer. She was born in Germany, and she says when she went to kindergarten, I think she must have been 5, and at some point she was asked to write an essay about a hare. And she said she was overjoyed that what delight and joy she felt writing this essay about the hare. And though she didn't realize it at the time, that was her destiny. She moved to England. She was Jewish. She was in Germany. She moved to England when she was 12 years old in 1939. She had a very hard time in Germany as a Jewish student. And when she moved to England, she began learning English. She learned English almost immediately. And having learned English, she began writing in English. But she didn't publish till she came to India. And once she came to India, as she says, she was just, she married my father, came to India, and she was just sort of she was overwhelmed. And she felt, as she says, I still can't describe the impact that India made on my innocent mind and senses. To try and express it would make me stutter. Stunning, overwhelming, beyond words. I entered a world of sensuous delights. And so she began writing about India as almost as if she was an Indian. And it was very late that people realized she really wasn't an Indian. But slowly, she sort of got further and further away from her subject. And at some point, she felt she had to leave. And she went to New York. And then but she kept coming back. So really, if you read her writings early or late, you find that she has been writing about India continuously. And the sort of intermixing of people in India and from the US or from England or from Europe. She became a screenwriter by accident. I won't go into the details of that, but her first screenplays were all by herself. I mean, they were either adaptations of her books, or original screenplays like Bombay Talkies or The Guru. And later on, when she went to New York, her first film was also a screenplay written by her called Roseland. And it was only after that she began adapting other people's books. The first being E.M. Forster, which was Room with a View, and Howard's End, and then she became more and more adventurous. And I think the last one she adapted, which hasn't been made into a film yet, was Independent People, which was about Finnish families in a century ago, a poor Finnish families a century ago, about whom she knows nothing actually. So what I'd like to show you next is a small video. I tried to find some video. I wanted her, Mira suggested, why don't you have her speaking about herself? And I looked and looked for a video about herself, and there wasn't anything. But the script, there's little pieces with her, James Ivory, and Ismail Merchant. And this script is sort of about the intersection of her script writing and her book writing, and how the two are influencing each other. And she's talking about Heat and Dust, or they're all talking about the making of Heat and Dust. So I think, shall we move to the a little video.
One, in adaptation, one is faithful on the surface, but actually, underneath that surface, one really does all sorts of things with what the original novel is. When it's finished, it might look like a thing of the original, but it really, I mean, I think for a fairly successful adaptation, it really has to change from within somehow. It has to have something completely different from the novel.
And also what Heaton does, if you read...
To your editing room a lot.
Yeah.
Before that, I didn't...
There have been many films that...
yeah, in between. So I knew, I was cutting I knew how to cut scenes and how to juxtapose scenes. And I thought, oh, great, I can do this with a novel. And in fact, I wrote it in a linear way. I wrote sort of long stretches of the 1923 story, long stretches of the 1975 story, and then, kind of pasted them together so that juxtaposed that each one was a counterpoint to the other.
When you are writing late to it,
This particular film certainly had sort of much grander scenes than I had envisioned. My palace in the book was really rather a sort of run-down place. It was called Khatam, which in English means finished, the end. So this particular royal state was at its end. It was really finished. But of course, on this, when it became a film, well, Jim wouldn't like to shoot in a state that's completely finished. He has to have these grand dinners, chandeliers.
No, but it was the most least of all the Maharaja's palaces.
That she spent in India and the fiction that she wrote while she was here. This is approximately between 1955, that is her published work. Her first published work, To Whom She Will, was in 1955, and the last one, Heat and Dust, was in 1975. So it's these 2 decades that I shall be covering. But then, owing to constraint of time, I shall certainly not be in a position to give you any detailed analyses of the works. I mean, the best I can do is to offer some vignettes, some glimpses, some insights into the mind of an extraordinary writer who came to India as an outsider, turned herself into an insider, and then became an outsider again. In this connection, Ruth Chawala said something very interesting, about her response to India. In an essay called Myself in India, she talked about a cycle of response through which all Westerners go. And she said, first stage, tremendous enthusiasm. Everything in India is marvelous. Second stage, everything Indian not so marvelous. Third stage, everything Indian abominable. And then she says, for some people it ends there. For others, the cycle renews itself and goes on. Now, Ruth, a lot of Western writers have contradicted this. They have said that they haven't gone through this particular cycle, but there's no doubt that Ruth did. And that this cycle, or the frame of mind in which she was during these various stages, influenced her work tremendously. Now, I shall come back to that a little later, but before that, I have something else to do. You see, I need to place her in the context of the tradition of writing to which she belongs. In India, we have a tradition which we call the Indo-Anglian tradition of writing, in which Indians write in English about India. And this tradition, believe it or not, actually started in the 1850s with Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Rajmohan's Wife. It was a novel. And Michael Madhusudhan Datta's epic poem, Captive Lady. Both these gentlemen thought that they could write in English and that they would make a mark, their work would make a mark. Unfortunately, they both bombed so badly that they never wrote in English again. They turned to the indigenous Bengali and later on became very famous, as we all know. And another strange thing is, for the next 100 years, no work of an Indian writer was done in English. I mean, somebody may have written something, but not of any consequence because nobody's heard of it. But again, after independence, suddenly there was an uprush of writing. R.K. Narayan, Raja Rao, Mulk Rajanand, and then later on Manohar Mulgaonkar, Nayantara Sehgal, Anita Desai. All these people started writing. And then the tradition or that kind of writing became very popular. And she says, no, how could I be? I write differently from Indian writers because my birth, background, ancestry, and traditions are different. If I must be considered anything, then let it be as one of the European writers who have written about India. Ruth Chawala starts writing after independence. She starts writing, I think, somewhere in the 50s because her first book was published in 55. And her contribution, which is a lasting contribution and an amazing contribution, which a lot of people have not even known, I think, is that for the first time in this tradition of writing, she introduces the intra-Indian context. She's actually talking. British characters, British or American, are peripheral in her early novels. It's really the Indians themselves that she's examining. Their interactions with each other. She's looking at marital dissonance, husband and wife problems of of settling down, understanding each other. That is one. Like in The Householder, we have this. Then in The Nature of Passion, in Esmond in India, it's cross-generational conflict. The younger generation are more modern. They have different ideas. So there is clash between them and their parents. But in the ultimate analysis, what one sees is that a kind of resolution happens. What Ruth Chawala seems to be saying in her writing, this phase of her writing, is that Indians are basically very assimilative in nature. They'll push a few boundaries, they'll pull in a little bit, there'll be some permutations, combinations, but ultimately the family won't break, the community won't break. It will still remain one solid whole. And this, she thinks, is a very valuable, I mean, she places a lot of value on this. She talks about the Indian family, and she says, for them it is enough just to be together. There are long stretches of silence, a little spurt of conversation on some commonplace everyday subject. There is no attempt at exercising the mind or testing one's wits against those of others. The pleasure lies in having other familiar people around and enjoying the air together. There is something very restful about this mode of social intercourse. It is also more adapted to the Indian climate, which invites one to be absolutely relaxed in mind and body, to do nothing, to think nothing, just to feel, to be. I have, in fact, enjoyed sitting around like this for hours on end.
Shanti and Buaji sat in their courtyard. It was late at night, and the children had one by one dropped off to sleep. Mukund, Shanti's husband, was also asleep upstairs and had been so for some hours now. But the three women still sat up as if they were waiting for or hoping for something that the day had not yet given them. They liked sitting together like this. There was not much to say, but their silence was pleasant and companionable. Shanti's youngest child was asleep in her lap, and she rocked her knee a bit up and down from time to time and murmured a snatch of a song. Buaji clicked the beads of her rosary and said God's name over and over under her breath. The night air was warm, the sky a brilliant silver from a fat, full moon. A tree out in the street reared over the top of the wall, enclosing their courtyard, and next to it was a lamp post which spilled light over one side of its leaves.
Shanti said, "What was he telling me about starting a theatre? He was so excited." Judy smiled. "He told you so?" "I was washing clothes and suddenly he came. She laughed at the recollection. How he talked, and looking at me with big, big eyes, as if it was I who was going to give him the money to start his theatre. She clasped her hands before her face and rocked herself to and fro in amusement, while the baby slept peacefully in her lap. I didn't understand anything of what he said. She ended up, and that too struck her as funny as she laughed again. It's a new scheme, Judy said. Poor boy, said Buaji affectionately. Oh no, Judy said. He enjoys it. They were all quiet on that for a while. It was true. Bal seemed to be happy most of the time, running around with his friends, making his contacts, dreaming his schemes.
This morning,
For some, it renews itself. The cycle renews itself. And I feel that with Jhabwala, it did renew itself in a slightly complicated way. It is true that she herself left. She left India and went away after writing Heat and Dust. But two of her characters, I mean, we just saw the film on the making of Heat and Dust. And I'm sure most of you have read the book or seen the film. It's about these two women who come out to India 50 years apart. One of them in the 20s, she's the wife of a ICS official, and the other one is a simple English girl who comes to find out, to discover her roots, the truth about her forefathers, the men who ruled India. And she brings with her letters and diaries, and in the process of reading what she's brought, and in the process of her writing her own experiences, her own diaries, the lives of the two women are revealed. The Olivia, the Mem Sahib, who came in the 20s, and this girl, of course, doesn't have a name. She's just simply, she writes in the first person, so we refer to her as the narrator. They come to the same